Back in the 80s, we put on parties in the desert, and we called ourselves Desolation Center.
When I was like in 11th grade, the LA punk scene was just at a really amazing point where there was just incredible things to go see. Bands like the Germs and Black Flag and all X and you know, the Bags and all these great legendary groups where you could just basically no one cared. You could see this whole incredible scene, so that was really inspiring to me. Then it felt like things had gotten a little bit more like combination of the nightclubs started booking these bands that were a little more commercial, and then the LAPD, the police department at that time, was really hardcore about cracking down on anything that was a little bit more spontaneous, that had the punk vibe, even if they weren't really like a hardcore band, like, you know, that was going to tear the place down or whatever. And so with some friends, we just decided that we should do it ourselves, so that the time had come to like step up and contribute something to this scene that was so important to me. The stuff that went on when we were putting on these events was actually far crazier than anything that happened while we were shooting the doc. And I would also add that we have original archival footage, so a lot of what you see in the film was filmed by people during these events. So one of the things that happened was the second desert show that we did was with these guys from Berlin called Einstürzende Neubauten, and then they invited people from San Francisco called Survival Research Laboratories. And so they weren't really a band at all, they were machine artists, and what they did actually ended up inspiring a lot of the people that did fire art and machine art at Burning Man in the future. But they were kind of like, well, we're just gonna come down there with this tank and maybe some like black powder. And then the tank, they weren't able to even bring the tank, and it wasn't, you know, it was like making the car too heavy. So basically they showed up with gunpowder. And so they went around and found things that had been left out in the desert, which was really inspired. Like they found these old refrigerators and junk like that, made what they called totem poles out of them, and then basically blew them up as sort of an opening act. They put an explosive charge in a cave, and then they put a piece of metal over it. I'm not quite sure why. But anyway, the explosion went off, and then the metal plate went spinning out over the crowd like a frisbee, which Mark Pauline told me. I didn't know about this till we did the interview. But basically, he was worried it was going to like cut somebody in half or whatever. But it was 10 feet over the crowd, so nobody was hurt. It was definitely an interesting process because, I mean, part of me had forgotten so much, you know, part of me hadn't seen some of these people in 30 years, you know, so then they get an email, you know, let's say it's Kurt Kirkwood from the Meat Puppets, like, hey, it's Stuart. I was like, oh yeah, you know, I haven't talked to you in a while. But what I found was that those people, you know, people like Mariska and myself and all the other people that worked on the film or that were in the film, you know, we have some kind of connection. You know, it's partly about doing these crazy events in the desert, but it's also partly about the DIY spirit that we all kind of embarked on all this with, and it's partly about kind of a certain era of independent labels and music and sort of a more experimental approach to punk. So there was just a lot to talk about. Part of me had always wanted to work in film or in some kind of media and to learn how to do this kind of work, so I worked for the Sci-Fi Channel. They had something called the Sci-Fi Lab, and then it all led to me getting some good skills and learning to work with editors and camera operators and things like that, but not really doing the kind of work I wanted to do. And I always had this aspiration to get back into documentaries. So then I have some friends, we just, almost as an escape, would get together and watch music documentaries and drink beer and like talk through the whole thing. And it would be whoever, you know, Captain Beefheart, The Fall, people that we wanted to learn more about. And so I just really fell in love with the genre of music documentaries. And I thought, wow, I'm a record geek. I love music. I have this background. I should do a music documentary. And then it took me another like mental leap to go, oh, you have your own story that actually is probably more interesting than a lot of other ones that you would look around to tell. So then I started looking into the archival footage, what was out there, because you can't really make a good documentary without the footage, and tracked down people that I had given permission to film 30 years ago or whatever, and people were very cooperative, and so it just started to pull together. And then I realized, wow, there's so many interesting people, from Thurston Moore to Blixa Bargeld to all these different people, and then people that aren't famous as well, that were at these shows, and they're really interesting. So it just felt like this was a story that needed telling, and I should do it.